December 27th, 2021. While the football world was still digesting its Christmas leftovers, a 29-minute interview began quietly circulating on social media that would change everything. In it, a man who had cost £97.5 million, Chelsea's record transfer, one of the most expensive signings in the history of English football, sat calmly before a camera and told the world, with devastating composure, that he did not want to be there.
Physically, I am fine, but I'm not happy with the situation at Chelsea. Tuchel has chosen to play with another system. I won't give up. I'll be professional. I am not happy with the situation, but I am professional, and I can't give up now.
I'm not happy with the situation at Chelsea, Romelu Lukaku said. Tuchel has chosen to play with another system. Physically, I am fine, but I am not happy. Within 48 hours, Chelsea had fined him £500,000. Within 6 months, they had sent him back to the club they had bought him from. Within a year, Romelu Lukaku had publicly described his return to Stamford Bridge as a mistake. This is not the story of a player who simply underperformed. This is the story of a homecoming that was broken long before anyone publicly admitted it. To understand the full weight of Romelu Lukaku's second failure at Chelsea, you first have to understand what the club did to him the first time. In 2011, an 18-year-old boy arrived at Stamford Bridge from Anderlecht with the kind of raw, terrifying potential that scouts spend entire careers searching for. He was enormous, not merely tall, but architecturally constructed for the game of football. Wide shoulders, powerful legs, a stride that consumed ground with the economy of a machine built for a single purpose. But before he was any of those things, he was a child from Antwerp who had grown up watching his mother mix water into his milk to make the family's budget stretch to the end of the week. He understood, from before he could fully articulate it, that football was not a career choice. It was the only available exit. Chelsea never knew that boy. What they saw was a teenager who did not fit neatly into their system, and so they sent him elsewhere. He was loaned to West Bromwich Albion, where he scored 8 Premier League goals. He was loaned to Everton, where he announced himself to English football with 15 goals in a single season. Performances so commanding that the question of why Chelsea had loaned him out in the first place became quietly embarrassing. He was sold, without ceremony, in the summer of 2014, as Chelsea moved on to other priorities without a backwards glance. The world outside Stamford Bridge, however, was paying very close attention. At Everton, Lukaku developed into one of the most feared strikers in the Premier League. At Manchester United, despite the institutional dysfunction that perpetually surrounded the club, he scored 42 goals across 2 seasons. But it was at Inter Milan, under Antonio Conte's precise and uncompromising tactical architecture, where Romelu Lukaku finally became the player he had always known he was capable of being. In 2021, he helped end a decade of Juventus dominance in Italian football. He finished the season with 24 Serie A goals and 11 assists. He was, by every available measurement, a world-class centre-forward, operating at the very peak of his powers. He was also, in almost every interview from that period, a man who spoke about Inter Milan as though it were home. And then Chelsea came calling. Again, in August 2021, Thomas Tuchel's Chelsea, the reigning Champions League winners, arguably the most technically sophisticated squad in European football, paid Inter Milan £97.5 million to bring Lukaku back to Stamford Bridge. It was their record transfer fee. It felt to an entire generation of Chelsea supporters who had watched a teenager be quietly discarded a decade earlier like the closing of a painful circle, like an acknowledgement delivered at last in the only language football truly understands, that a mistake had been made. What nobody asked, amid the fanfare and the shirt reveals and the deafening noise of expectation, was a single and devastatingly important question. Is this the right system for Romelu Lukaku? But beneath the theatre of the homecoming, beneath the record fee and the redemption narrative and the manufactured sentiment of return, something was already misaligned, because Thomas Tuchel's Chelsea was not the same structure that had unlocked Lukaku's brilliance at Inter Milan. And Romelu Lukaku would discover that truth not gradually, not privately, but in the most public and devastating way imaginable. He scored on his debut a composed finish in a 2-0 win at Arsenal, then twice against Aston Villa 3 weeks later. The narrative held for a bright, fleeting few weeks. The headlines were everything Chelsea had imagined when they sanctioned the fee. And then Romelu Lukaku did not score another Premier League goal for 3 months. Tuchel's system was not built around the strengths of a central striker. It was built around fluidity, a pressing, rotating front line that prioritised movement, interchangeability, and the exploitation of space between defensive lines. Antonio Conte had constructed an entire tactical machine around Lukaku's specific qualities at Inter. The hold-up play, the explosive direct running, the capacity to function simultaneously as target man, physical reference point, and clinical finisher. At Chelsea, Lukaku was being asked to suppress the very instincts that had made him exceptional, to be smaller, more peripheral, less himself. The goals became sporadic. Injuries and illness compounded the uncertainty. By December, Lukaku had scored 7 goals in 18 appearances, the output of a squad player, not a £97.5 million statement signing. He was being substituted before matches had fully developed. The gap between the man on the pitch and the player who had dominated Serie A was no longer a tactical inconvenience. It had become impossible to ignore. On December 26th, Chelsea drew with Liverpool at Stamford Bridge. Lukaku played 31 minutes. He walked off the pitch with the expression of a man who had long since stopped pretending. The following morning, the Sky Sport Italia interview was published in full. "I have always said that I have Inter in my head," Lukaku had told the interviewer. "I know I will return to Inter. I really hope so. I am in love with Italy." Chelsea fined him £500,000. Tuchel publicly distanced himself from his own record signing. The atmosphere inside the dressing room, already strained, deteriorated further. And the narrative, the triumphant homecoming, the one that had sold replica shirts and inspired an entire summer of confident talk about title challenges, collapsed entirely under the weight of a single, unguarded, honest conversation. What the condemnation consistently failed to address was the uncomfortable fact at the centre of all of it. Lukaku had not lost his ability to play football. His physical condition was not in question. He had been placed inside a tactical environment fundamentally incompatible with everything that had made him extraordinary. And he had said so, clearly, publicly, without diplomatic cushioning. The footballing world responded in the way it almost always does, not with structural examination, not with any serious interrogation of whether a £97.5 million signing had been systematically placed in the wrong system from the day he arrived, but with fury, with the swift and reassuring verdict that the problem was the man and not the machine. By the summer of 2022, Lukaku was gone, loaned back to Inter Milan. In his first season back in Milan, he scored 14 Serie A goals. The numbers said everything that his Chelsea appearances had never been permitted to say. Chelsea would eventually sell him to Napoli in 2024, recovering a fraction of their original investment. By conservative estimate, the club lost somewhere in the region of £70 million on a player who, under a different structure, with a different manager, had been one of the most dominant strikers in European football for the better part of 3 years. The story of Romelu Lukaku at Chelsea, across both chapters of it, is not, at its core, a story about talent. It is a story about institutional blindness, about what happens when a football club becomes so consumed by the narrative of an acquisition, the record fee, the redemption arc, the returning hero, that it never stops to seriously examine whether it has built the conditions for that player to succeed. Chelsea bought the idea of Lukaku. They were never genuinely committed to the reality of him. The first time, they discarded him before he had been given any meaningful opportunity to prove himself. The second time, they paid nearly £100 million and then refused to adapt their structure to the player they had bought. They expected wholesale adaptation. He expected structural accommodation. Neither moved. And the space between those two positions swallowed everything. Football has a long and inglorious history of this particular failure, of clubs acquiring greatness and then slowly dismantling it by refusing to ask the most fundamental question available to them: what does this person actually need from us? Romelu Lukaku asked that question in December 2021. The footballing world punished him for the asking. He was not wrong about the system. He was simply wrong about the timing, and the audience, and the medium. In football, those three mistakes are sometimes enough to define your entire legacy at a club. Romelu Lukaku is one of the finest strikers of his generation. His goals across Europe are a matter of historical record. But at Chelsea, twice over, he was a great player in the wrong place. And the wrong place, it turned out, was exactly where £97.5 million had decided he belonged. Thank you for watching Final Whistle Stories. If this documentary resonated with you, subscribe for more untold realities of the beautiful game. Until next time.